We're going to talk about Brexit. It's a very interesting idea, been going on for a long time now. We're going to discuss about different aspects of Brexit. It's going to be likely going to be a longish video. You straight away I'm going to tell you that a bunch of interesting articles are there in the description. One article by the BBC is fabulous. That gives you a comprehensive overview of that. We've given the link on the description. Do check that out. So what is, before we start on what Brexit is, where did it begin? What is the original relationship? What is the idea of EU? And so the EU is a construct which basically aggregates a bunch of countries in Europe and creates one region for them. And there are multiple ideas here. The idea of EU, the currency euro, and the area Schengen, the different countries that go into each region. The details you can find online, but that's not the important point. The important point is a bunch of countries in Europe decided to come together and position themselves as a single market. And so they did different things to simplify life, but the fundamental idea is a single market, which is premised on a bunch of principles. The two most important and relevant ones as far as Brexit and our present discussion is concerned, there's going to be free movement of trade of goods and services and free movement of people. So people who, countries that are part of the union. So basically, essentially, what long and short of it, suppose you were there in Netherlands and you wanted to go to Italy, you could take a car and drive across. Nowhere will there be a checkpoint. You produce something in Belgium, you want to sell it in Netherlands, you can hawk it. Nowhere do you have to mention where it was created, and therefore there's no notion of import tariff, export tariff, and all of that. And so, which means this EU can now discuss terms with a bunch of other entities as a single market. That also meant that they had to have the same set of rules on a bunch of things. So there could be no subsidies for a specific industry, no special treatment for someone. The rules on environmental control had to be synchronized so that industries across the level could have the same level playing field to have with. And so that is the idea behind it. The underlying idea even before all this was to make sure that the different countries in Europe had a very critical stake in each other's future. This is also important because the two world wars started in Europe. And so there's also a notion of peace and defense thrown in, so that if countries have stake in each other, they're less likely to go bombing each other. And so that is also an underlying role. And so when people say the EU as a construct is a success, they say, look, this peace is reigned in this place, and trade and unifying, they become a bigger block. They could bargain with a bunch of people. And so where does it become difficult? Like imagine a Chinese society which has 40 different flats. There's always going to be somebody who says, I don't want this watchman. There's somebody who's going to say, we don't like that CCTV. Somebody who says, I won't pay the maintenance fee. So those things continuously, perennially happen in Europe. They've always happened, will continue to happen. And so what is interesting is Britain has always had a one step in, one step out relationship with EU. And so in migration of people, you have to be on board with that. But Britain was never part of the Schengen area. So it's like from India, if you took a visa to go to Germany, you could just drive across to Belgium. But you could not take a ship or take a flight across to London. That's not possible. Right? So it was not part of the visa union. It was not part of the currency union. So even though euro was a common currency for a bunch of countries, so Germany gave up the Deutschmark, Italy gave up the lira. A bunch of currencies disappeared to be replaced by the euro, but the pound sterling hung on. So Europe also functioned beautifully because it could create subgroups and handle people on. So it was one big tent where they got people under one roof, and the slightly different people had different rules. The massive advantage they had was there was no tariffs, so trade was simpler. There was no customs point and checkpoints. So it was easier to move goods and services. Migration of people was easy, so you could go to places where the economy was thriving. So suppose you were a one type of engineer who graduated in Germany, but the best jobs for that was available only in Spain. You could just take a train across and then find your job there. Right? So it is premised on the principle that there will be no restrictions on travel of goods, services, and people. And why I keep repeating this is the bone of contention was pretty much the second of these rules, that is open borders for people. So even though Britain was part of the EU, part of the trading bloc, Britain was getting slightly finicky about the idea that people could come in to the UK. So the politically sensitive thing. So immigration has become an issue across the world. In many of the Western countries, immigration is a serious issue. And so people felt that some of their jobs were getting taken away by people coming in. And I'm not going to get into the merits or demerits of that argument, but the hourly rate for somebody from Poland and somebody in Middle England are 1:5 apart. So what a Polish guy is willing to work for on a per hour basis is much lower than what the Middle England guy might be. So that is probably a politically sensitive issue for a bunch of parties in Europe, in UK. So they wanted to have all the relationships with the trade component, but not all of this with the immigration component. So they wanted to have open trade. Their argument was, look, open trade in and of itself. Look, I won't put import tariffs, you don't put import tariffs. I don't put export tariff, you don't put export tariff. If this is achieved, it is brilliant. If all countries can sign on and get deals like this, then the tariff barriers would fall down, economies would grow. And that standalone is sufficient. Why do we need to have an extra layer of people also being able to free to travel? The European Union obviously did not like that. They were more in it as, look, we're all in this together. We're a group of 27 countries. We formulate rules together. If something goes wrong, it goes wrong for everyone. Right? So European Union works on a set of checks and balances. They give a lot of exceptions. They somehow make it work. But the people traveling is a fundamental rule for the way the union is constructed. One of the non-negotiables for EU. So Britain had got a lot of leeway, Britain is a very important economy for the European Union, so they kept Britain happy, they kept England happy. But finally, where the things broke off completely was migration of people, and that happened. It was a serious thing. So that was a issue. How did it happen politically? Britain has two main parties, the Tories and Labour. Tories, they came to power after a while. So Tony Blair was part of Labour. He had 3 successive terms along with Gordon Brown, and then when the Tories came in, David Cameron became the Prime Minister, and he had made a promise that they will have a referendum on the EU issue. It was very clear on the Europe issue. So he had made that promise. He had stuck his neck out and said, look, I will give people a chance to vote on this. We will have a referendum on whether England or Britain needs to be within this the Europe construct. And so he had to maintain it. He went in and conducted the referendum, but he was very clearly campaigning for Britain to stay in the EU. His gut feel or his contention was that Britain, we will have this referendum, be done with it, Britain will be part of Europe. That issue is addressed. Some of the hardcore leave Europe people are put in their place, because we've had a referendum and people said we'll stay in Europe, so we win them over and then we're done and then we'll be part of Europe. That was his political calculation. It didn't work. So Britain voted to exit. That's where the term Brexit came into being. Around about the same, so David Cameron had to leave. So the political actors that came to hold center stage, one lady Theresa May, who came in, and the Labour Party was headed by Jeremy Corbyn. Funnily enough, Jeremy Corbyn has also been anti-EU, anti-Europe for a long time. When I say anti-Europe, it's not against Europe, it's against the idea of Britain being part of Europe. And so Theresa May was never a strong campaigner on either side, but she was for staying in Europe. But once the people voted, she said the people have said we have to leave, and then she coined this phrase, Brexit means Brexit, we need to leave. People have said we need to leave, so we'll have to find some mechanism of leaving. Right? So this is the starting point of why this whole Brexit brouhaha started. What is the background behind this? Where does Britain sit in? What are the political parties that are involved? What are the motivation for Britain to say we need to leave? Europe tried a lot to accommodate Britain, but finally Britain decided, yeah, we're leaving. Right? So after they decided that, what did they do? Right? So the British Parliament triggered what is called as Article 50. Basically, any one of the states can say, look, we're now passing this. That means a timer begins, and in a 2-year window, that said country is going to leave the European Union. That is the idea. And so why a 2-year window? The Union as a whole would have signed a lot of treaties, and so lots of links. And when you leave, so very simple things become very important. And so Britain has certain set of rules for what kind of food items can be sold. what kind of the limits for treatment of animals that can go on sale. Europe has a different set of rules. For all trade disputes, there is a European court that stands supreme, whereas Britain has a different court system. So everything has to be kind of reframed. So that takes a long while. So from the time of triggering of Article 50, usually the time window, the 2-year time ticker starts rolling. That's where the Article 50 being triggered, the 2-year time window started, and the 2-year time window is set to expire on the end of March 2019, March 29th. That's where I think the date is. Right? So now what do? So they sit across the table and decide on what are the terms of this exit, Brexit or divorce or whatever you call it. Right? So the bunch of things that the people who want Britain to leave, what are they saying? They're saying, look, Britain is encumbered by a lot of these rules. Europe is putting restrictions on how we run our business. They're not democratically elected, but they govern our trade rules, our immigration rules, and to some part, some judicial systems also. So that's a big pain in the neck. We don't want any of this. We want our freedom. We want our sovereignty back. The guys were reminding, what do they say? It's a massively successful union. It's a good trading bloc. Immigration is not through the roof. It's still manageable. We need to be part of this bloc in order to get favorable terms in trade, vis-a-vis say a trade deal with US or Canada or India or China, because EU is bigger and has bigger terms. And the moment you get out of the group, they're going to treat you like any other player. So obviously the EU has far greater bargaining power than UK when it comes to a trade negotiation. And so those are the two sides of the pot. We want our sovereignty back is one group. Look, we need to work with this system. This has worked. There's no need to throw it out. That is the main argument. Those are the two sides that are sitting there. And when it comes to UK and EU, UK went to the bargaining table. They put a set of ideas with EU. Their number one plan was to get as good a trade deal as possible without giving anything away in terms of immigration. And so what became, funnily enough, a serious taunt in the works. So 2 points. One is political, the other is got to do with Ireland. And so Ireland, UK is a complicated place. There's England, Wales, Scotland, Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland. Different structures. These are part of EU, part of Ireland, part of Great Britain, UK, different classifications. Long and short of it, Ireland is Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland. They have a gigantic long border. One sits in EU, other sits in UK. So any deal you form, the moment the two are in different parts, you need to have a customs checkpoints and border sitting in between. And neither wanted that. So that became a serious bone of contention that seems to be rumbling on. So that is one very serious stumbling block in these negotiations. The other one, as ever, was immigration. UK wanted serious restrictions on immigration, which EU was not willing to concede on because that is part of the original fabric of the EU. And so where are we headed now? Very recently, last week of in January 2019, they had finally nailed down an entire deal, which a bunch of terms that Theresa May had argued for, and she had to bring it back to her parliament and make it pass through, and she suffered an historic defeat. And both her own party and Labour both heavily voted against the deal, so it was a huge defeat. So the deal that the British government had spent years negotiating and finally coming to terms with, as far as the discussion with EU was concerned, did not pass through Parliament. Immediately they put up the opposition party had to try to push through a no confidence vote, which did not win. So Theresa May, her party and opponents are basically saying the deal you spent 2 years on, your entire tenure on, we don't like it, that is useless. And then they are saying, but we still want you as Prime Minister, when there's no other better way to describe lame duck than this. And so it's a classic stalemate. None of the parties want to shift, and then there's this person whose deal you don't like, that's her entire work you don't like. So it's been simpler to just shift her out and then start all over again with either somebody else or with a variant of some other deal in place. You don't want that either, and they're playing like so the deadline is approaching. So if the deadline approaches, what happens? And so If you don't have a deal in place, you have no deal in place. That is a no deal scenario. What happens? So both parties have been wise enough to come up with a giant transition agreement, which runs for a long period of time. So during this transition, they'll do a bunch of things. But this basically means Britain has no deal with EU. That means the World Trade Organization rules will apply, and Britain will deal with the rest of Europe like how perhaps India or China would deal. Not as part of the club, not as part of the member who decide rules, but as someone who's going to sign up a treaty with them. Those kind of treaties take a long time to beat down. Till their individual treaties come in play, World Trade Organization rules will apply. So it will become chaotic. So the transition agreement helps them, but it essentially means that another 2 years or 21 months or whatever time the transition agreement is again limbo, because you don't know what is going to be at the end of it and what kind of form no deal will take. No deal is not a return to status quo. And no deal doesn't mean the relationship is same. No deal means Britain is no longer part of EU and does not have a deal either. So it is not reverting to what you started off with. And so that is where these terms hard Brexit and soft Brexit come in. Soft Brexit was peddled by a bunch of moderates. They said, look, let's have a scenario where we move a little bit. We say, look, some trade of goods and services can happen. Some movement of people can happen. The border in Ireland, we can have a customs. We don't have too many checkpoints, but we can have some people moving here and there. Effectively, we work within the framework of EU. We let their court have some oversight, and we haggle and settle at a in-between point. Hard Brexit is, look, we don't want anything that doesn't comply with our terms. Sovereignty comes supreme. That's where we will go. Hard Brexit is very similar to no deal. We have our ideas, we'll stick with them. If the EU can't meet us there, then we'll stay like that. The different parties, the Labour Party, Theresa May, and the hardcore Brexiters, part of Tories, they're not meeting eye to eye on this. Funnily enough, the Prime Minister does not have any bargaining chip because she's negotiated for 2 years, got a deal, and she can't push it through her own parliament. Europe has been very consistent in this. They've always stuck to their guns. UK has hoped and played, saying at the last minute Europe will come back and say, look, let's sign a deal, it doesn't matter, we'll give them what they want. Because if Britain is going to lose a lot if the deal doesn't go through, Europe is also a loser. And Britain is a large economy. And having Britain in EU strengthens the union enormously. And so losing a key member is a serious issue. But there's still 27 countries. So it's a loss, but not as big a loss as it would be for the UK. So they've been consistent. They said, look, these are the terms of how we'll negotiate this, but we're not bending over backwards to accommodate the UK. They've been very consistent with the set of rules they've outlined. So that is pretty much about it as far as Brexit is concerned. So what is Brexit about? Why did it come? What is the fundamental thing that's not working? What happened in the political scenario? What could happen now? Most likely outcomes from now, no deal is a serious possibility, in which case they're going to transition without a deal in place, which will be chaotic for a few months and limbo for 18 months after that, where it would be very similar. So a lot of businesses in the UK don't know whether they want to double down and invest more in UK or shift out and go to Europe and be done with this process. That's going to continue. So more investment could go out. So the uncertainty will continue for probably another 18 months if it is a no deal scenario. Britain will find itself in a slightly more isolated place. They'll have to strike out deals with each country standalone, which can be a pain in the neck. And so you should know some broad ideas about Brexit, but you don't need to go into details of British politics, their parties, their democracy, their parliament, none of that. You need to have an idea of what is this Europe, what is the premise under which Europe was created, what is the fundamental contradiction between why Brexit was initiated, what is the fundamental conflict that Britain found in that, why could Britain not continue? Britain basically said, ask for a divorce. Why? What does the term mean? What does the conflict mean? How did the negotiations go? And then where do we stay here? Especially if your interview is very close to March 29, which is the last date, and things get really exciting, then you need to have a closer and closer eye on what's happening in terms of Brexit. You don't need to go too much in detail, but you need to know the headline terms and conditions. There are a couple of links in the description which are very useful. So definitely go through them. They should be useful. Best wishes for your interview preparation.